the Rockefeller Center. My name is Charlie Wheelan. I teach here at the Rockefeller Center. And germane to our discussion here, I'm also the founder and co-chair of Unite America, which is an organization working to support process changes around elections and also moderate candidates in both parties. It is my honor to moderate this discussion, not debate, today with our two members. Zach Wamp served in the House of Representatives for more than 15 years, representing Tennessee's 3rd District. He was a senior member on the House Appropriations Committee and co-chair of the Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency Caucus. And this one is particularly interesting. He also founded the Congressional Fitness Caucus. He is now the president and owner of Zach Wamp Consulting, a bipartisan consulting and development firm for a wide range of businesses across the country. He worked as a small businessman and a commercial real estate broker prior to serving in Congress. Tim Roemer, to his right, served 6 terms in the U.S. House of Representatives for Indiana's 3rd Congressional District. You both served in the 3rd District, for whatever that is worth, and was an instrumental member of the 9/11 Commission after the attacks on September 11th, 2001. In Congress, he was known as a consensus builder and worked on education initiatives such as Head Start, AmeriCorps, affordable higher education, and the like. As ambassador to India, Tim led one of the largest diplomatic missions and helped move India from America's 25th largest trading partner to 12th and expanded the country's commercial sales in defense and space industries. I would also like to welcome back Dick Sweat, former representative from New Hampshire and former ambassador to Denmark and member of the Reformers Caucus. So I'm going to start by having each of you talk about the work that you're doing now with issue 1, and then we'll have some more specific questions. Zach, you want to start?
Tim can start. He's a senior member.
See, this is how it works.
Senior meaning older, not wiser, just older.
Correct.
Well, Charlie, thank you for the introductions, the gracious and kind introductions for both me and for Congressman Wamp and for Ambassador Sweat. We wouldn't be here without your kind of introduction and invitation from the Rockefeller Center and without Ambassador Sweat's deep connections to the community here that we're very grateful for. I'm particularly proud to be at Dartmouth University in the Rockefeller Center because I have a nephew here, Connor Roemer, who's attending as a freshman at Dartmouth, and my daughter, Grace, is dating a Dartmouth freshman. So it feels a little bit like family for me to be here at this great university. What are we doing at issue 1 and why is it important? I think that's one of the most common questions that my brother here and I get when we go from campus to campus, from Tennessee to Iowa, from Indiana to Pennsylvania, and talk to different audiences and crowds. If you look around the world, and I'm sure it's one of the reasons why people are here in the audience, democracy is under assault. I just returned from Beijing, China, where the Chinese can say to us at times, you don't have a functioning democracy, Tim, in America. You have 435 representatives. Only about 70 of those are competitive seats anymore. The rest of them are kind of rigged. And we have, and that's probably pretty true, we have from the Philippines to Brazil and China with Xi as the leader. We have autocrats, authoritarian regimes dominating the world since the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Soviet Union. It's no different in America. I think a lot of working middle-class people in America are saying, we don't trust either party. Congress doesn't represent us enough. There are lobbyists ahead of us in the line. There are moneyed interests and donors ahead in the line. When is our voice going to be heard as average people in our communities? Whether they be students at Dartmouth, whether they be staff at Dartmouth, whether they be people with the opioid crisis in New Hampshire or healthcare concerns, people want the government to work to solve some of their problems. And it's not, Charlie. It's dysfunctional too often in Washington. So issue 1, a Republican, Zach Wamp, and a Democrat, Tim Roemer, have come together, and we've helped with the leadership at issue 1. Meredith McGehee is here. Nick Penniman is our executive director. We're working in a bipartisan way to bring 200 former members of Congress together, governors, senators, majority leaders from the Senate, ministers, ambassadors, all have common interests to say, let's put country before party. Let's bring America's great magical experiment back so that our freedom, our liberty, our representative government is the most important thing. That's why we call ourselves Issue 1. Because if you're concerned about the environment and global warming as a Democrat, or deficits as a Republican, if you don't have a functioning government to help solve some of these problems, nothing works, folks. So this is the cause of the day. This is the compelling issue of the moment. How do students and citizens of this great country come together to try to make sure we cherish this magical experiment that was our revolution over 200 years ago and bring people together to help fix a broken political system? That's what we're doing, Charlie.
Zach, do you want to add to that?
Well, as a Southerner, I'm really honored too to be in New Hampshire, given the history here, and particularly at Dartmouth. What a prestigious place and great history. Charlie, thanks for hosting us. As Tim just said, from the very beginning, this was an experiment. Can people with this much freedom baked into our Constitution actually govern themselves? And I would suggest that for 200 years, that experiment went pretty well. But for the last 25 or so, it's not going so well. And we've devolved into this tribal environment where we no longer trust each other, and it seems like our enemy is our opponent as opposed to any potential foreign adversary. And we can talk a lot about that, defining the problem, but we're also about solutions and coming together and finding ways forward, because there's a lot at stake. You know, I've got 3 little grandkids, and I did serve in Congress for 16 years, and I don't want them to grow up and when somebody says, did your grandfather serve in the United States Congress, for them to actually either be ashamed of it or not even admit it. And the confidence in our institutions in this country is in decline, and the Congress may be at the front of that line. Even the Supreme Court, the confidence is way down. So what do we do to restore that? What do we do to engage ourselves? We've assembled this big team of former members that are united around this proposition that we have to go back to, as Tim said, putting our country above our party, but working together and ending the dysfunction and getting the Congress moving again. And that's what Issue 1 is all about. The latest big thing that we got involved in is this whole issue of election security. If we can't trust the security of our own elections from cycle to cycle, we have an even bigger problem. And in this day of artificial intelligence and what's called deep fakes, we can actually now look for in the next election cycle foreign adversaries to actually use this latest in technology to send messages that appear to be real, but they're not even real, and play it in our space. And we don't even have a regulatory scheme to prohibit it in this country. And there's a political defense of the status quo that is just unacceptable. And a lot of people, you may say, what's a Republican doing here talking about this? Guys, I came to Congress in class of 94. I signed under the Gingrich era and the Hastert era what's called a discharge petition to force the Bipartisan Campaign Finance Reform Act to the floor. As a matter of fact, they were so surprised that a conservative Republican like me, who came to Congress as a real reformer, didn't take PAC money, didn't use any franked mail. I can go down a list of things that I did to try to be different, to try to put this back in the hands of the people as opposed to the special interest. And then I signed the discharge petition. When McCain-Feingold, which was called Shays Meehan in the House, came to the floor for the debate, I closed the debate on the House floor. And we forget, but maybe he didn't even want to, but he did. A Republican president signed this into law. There's no real exclusivity on ethics for either party. So if anybody thinks that, if we just had all Democrats or all Republicans, we've seen this movie before. Frankly, it's institutionally corrupt in the sense that the special interests really drive the train. So what is Issue 1 about? We're trying to disrupt it in a positive way. And I got back into this after fighting the fight for 16 years in Congress. I got back into it when I felt the earth shaking in 2016. Sanders was a disruptor on one side, and Trump was a disruptor on the other side. And Sanders darn near disrupted this side, and Trump did disrupt this side. And obviously, we know what's happened there. I don't want to get into all that, because what I want to talk about is, what's this country going to be like after Trump? What are our expectations? What are our standards? What are our values? It's real important that we come together on that now, in my opinion, because there's going to be a moment where he's no longer the disruptor. He's no longer there. He's gone, and then what? Because I want our values and our standards to be the traditional ones we had as a country, where we meet at the water's edge on big issues. The Democrats and Republicans fight like hell for things you believe in, but at the end of the day, you got to compromise. You've got to move the process forward.
Because Americans have always had disagreements. You go back to Jefferson and Adams and so on. What is different in this movie that we're watching about how those ideological disagreements play out?
Well, I'll say one thing, and then Tim, you take this. I believe that blame has become a tool, a political tool, of the parties when they can't govern and they can't lead successfully. They just blame the other team. And now it's almost systemic, that it is actually a ploy that it's all their fault. Don't blame us. It's all their fault. And this is now a systemic problem. Americans used to accept responsibility together for big things. We made bad mistakes. The flawed intelligence going into Iraq, that was all of us. That was Hillary Clinton and George W. Bush. And so we should learn as a country to accept our failures. Slavery was a tragic, tragic flaw in American history. We all own that. That wasn't them or those, it was us. That's the big difference, is we're not willing as a nation to accept our collective responsibility in the world and at home. Tim?
So Charlie, I think there are several things that are kind of propelling us in this tribal direction today. And issue one is right at the forefront of trying to, in a bipartisan way, solve some of these issues. One, I won't get my phone out. I pay too much attention to it anyway, but they are addiction machines. And the more we pay attention to our phones and our iPads and that technology, it not only sucks up all our data and gives it free to big companies, it doesn't allow us the time to build friendships and communities that are so important as Americans. And I think that's the social media, digital media, we have to find the right balance. Two, I think we have problems with our general media. If you turn on Fox News or you turn on MSNBC, these are two echo chambers playing to minority bases in both parties and talking about riling people up rather than delivering news, interesting news to most people. Three, I think gerrymandering is a huge problem, creating safe districts for Republicans and Democrats and not the competitive. You got to fight for every vote. You got to represent your interests. You got to be home all the time. Zach and I both come from those kind of districts. We didn't have safe districts that, your only worry was a primary. We had tough, a Republican could beat me any 2 years. That's a good thing. That makes me more accountable to the voters and to the people. That's something that we talk about at issue one, changing gerrymandering. And four, money in politics. When Zach and I would run for office, you'd spend maybe 20% of your time raising money. That's still too much time. Now members of Congress spend 60, 70, 80% of their time dialing for dollars. And they're not talking to the construction worker down the street and the nurse around the corner. They're talking to the billionaire out in Silicon Valley. They're talking to the investment banker in New York City. That's not us. They're not hearing about our problems, with healthcare or higher education costs, opioid crisis. We need to fix Congress so that they're paying attention to the average person. Those are some of the problems that issue one in a bipartisan way is paying attention to. And I'd say the last thing, and Zach talked about this, election security. Now, as a 9/11 committee member, I don't come at this politically at all. I come at this strictly from an objective perspective. Bin Laden attacked America with 19 people. It wasn't an army. It wasn't tanks or fighters. It was people trained in the caves of Afghanistan. Today, in 2019, America can be attacked asymmetrically on the internet. We can have a troll farm in St. Petersburg, Russia, pretend to be certain people and get Americans fighting against each other with false advertising. We can have Chinese hackers get into our system and try to attack our state electoral systems and disrupt that security.
They did.
And the one vote pride that we take in our votes and potentially them not being cast. That should make all of us angry that a foreign power is trying to influence our elections and get us to be mad at each other. They're trying to get Zach and I to fight against each other to divide America. I don't care if you're a Trump supporter or a Biden supporter or one of the others. No foreign entity should come into our country and try to get us fighting against each other as Americans. That comes first, our pride in being Americans. So those are some of the problems, Charlie, and Issue 1 is the only bipartisan organization out there trying to work on solutions for it.
So I want to ask about how you engage two groups. One is you've got an impressive array of former members of Congress, but I'd like to see the same bipartisanship with current members of Congress. So how do you change the incentive for those folks?
Well, I want to give you some hope because, again, I don't want to be too much on the defensive as a Republican on a lot of these issues, but we are. I mean, frankly, Mitch McConnell is the guy standing in the gate or the door of the United States Senate on a lot of these issues. But as we've proven several times now, he's not completely invincible. If you want to know why he just switched last week to support $250 million more for election security, we're a large reason. We ran this Don't Mess With Us campaign all summer long. We activated the reformers. We got dozens and dozens and dozens, like 100 of our former members to sign on to these initiatives. We have worked with Marco Rubio in the Senate on an election security bill, James Lankford of Oklahoma, even Lindsey Graham has supported one of the bills that we support as the original co-sponsor. And so instead of
And Democrats like Amy Klobuchar and Mark Warner are working together.
The Democrats are there. My point is we're moving Republicans. In the House, we got, in the last Congress, 32 reformers, like the Reformers Caucus of former members, current members, and we go Noah's Ark, Charlie, one Republican, one Democrat at a time. Everything we do, we keep it that way. Otherwise, this thing gets lopsided and everybody starts pointing fingers. So 16 Republicans and 16 Democrats. Some of the Republicans are the newer, younger members that actually don't drink the Kool-Aid. A guy I'll point to is Mike Gallagher from Wisconsin. Marine vet, speaks fluent Arabic, Ivy League educated, I won't say where. But anyway, really an amazing guy. And he has stepped out as a kind of an independent voice, like the conscience. So we're actually on both sides, we're recruiting guys in and out to lead this charge. Why? Because we have to. We're in an unraveling here. So, Charlie, I'm telling you, we're making real progress now, inside and outside, to answer your question directly.
And I would just add to that, Zach is absolutely right, and not crowing and bragging enough about Issue 1's work on the Senate side and bringing together Republicans who will say to Mitch McConnell, look, you've got to let us vote on this. This is good for America to try to get this election security forward. And on the House side, Charlie, I'm up there, and more positive news. I think I've probably met, and Issue 1 has met with about 40 of the new Democrats elected in the midterms since 2018. Now, you don't hear about these new members. You all read about Omar and Tlaib and AOC from New York, which generate a lot of Twitter presence and social media presence and media presence. I'm talking about some of the members also that are stars in the Democratic Party that you don't read about. Congresswoman Spanberger from Virginia, Congresswoman Slotkin from Michigan, Congresswoman Sharice Davids from Kansas. These are Democrats that won in Trump districts, and they come not with an ideological bent. They are not party stalwarts. They're practical, pragmatic people. And they're in Washington to do two things: reform the system and make it work for the average American, and represent their constituents and not be dialing
So
for
that
dollars
actually leads
all
to
the
my
time.
second question. If either of you had promised free college or to make America great again, we'd be in a bigger room. Or if I had said I was going to insult your wives and then let you fight, it'd be made for better media. So how do we persuade people that they should pay attention to half a loaf conversations that are civil, if less exciting? Like, how do we encourage moderation when it is inherently civil and therefore sometimes less interesting, at least from an entertainment standpoint?
Well, as a people, we still slow down when we go by Rex. And Jerry Springer, gave rise to this reality TV mindset of a food fight. So it's sort of the underbelly of us. But I think it's imperative, knowing that's a tendency for humans to gravitate towards that kind of conflict, that kind of nastiness, that we have to kind of work against it to say that's not our tradition. At the end of the day, we rise above these things. It's like Mrs. Obama said, when they go low, we go high. I mean, we have to do that as a nation. And it's imperative that people that have led, Ambassador Sweat's a great example from our Reformers Caucus, of staying engaged and actually taking our country through this. This is a low spot. This is a time where the future is going to be determined whether this civil government survives or not. I mean, there's no guarantee that we do, to be honest with you, and it's going to take people coming together. So I think we actually have to intentionally be about the business of convincing people that that's not the best way. And I do think, frankly, post-Trump, this disruptive period, we have an opportunity to decide. Do we want to hold up our values and our expectations and our standards, or are we going to go to the Kardashian era next? I mean, is Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson going to be the next president, after Trump or after this next cycle? I would also say this. I'm encouraged by the next generation. These younger, newer Democrats that he's talking about and the younger, newer Republicans. I mean, frankly, Dan Crenshaw, the patch guy from Texas, he is a Navy SEAL. We're seeing these intelligence leaders, these national security leaders from both sides, from the next generation, be really patriotic and really pragmatic and really working together. And it gives us great hope that if we can help transfer power from this generation to the next generation sooner, we've got a chance to come back together as a nation. And if that happens at the top, then everybody's going to get it. But I also believe now that we can't blame the media. There's an important role for the media, but we got to have their cooperation, because they can't zero in on these food fights as the most important story every day and expect for everyone else to act differently.
Charlie, if I could too, I just say to us, and I think I'm speaking for Zach. Zach, you elbow me sharply from the Fitness Caucus if you disagree with us. We'd rather have 10 people in this audience, even though every seat isn't taken, decide they're going to get involved, they're going to do something about taking their government back, rather than a packed audience and nobody. They're coming for entertainment, and nobody ends up taking action or doing anything about it. There's a great stock picker by the name of Warren Buffett who says the time to buy stocks is not when they're most popular, when they're least popular in a value stock. Same thing can be said about getting involved in our government. Right now, we are in an abyss. We are in a valley, and it's deep. And we're going to come out of it as a people in a country, but you will be the reason we come out of it sooner rather than later. Dartmouth students from the Democratic and the Republican clubs coming together and saying, we're not going to just invite extremists from both sides to come to campus. We're going to jointly invite some Democrats and Republicans to be in the same room and talk about solutions for America. Or you guys can start running for office at the local level. We're seeing change ablaze across America at the local level. Reforms, ethics reforms, lobbying reforms in the state legislatures. You can influence things at the local level, maybe faster than you can at the state level, no matter what age you are. So, Charlie, there are ways to make a difference. There are things we can do right away, and differences that Americans can make to make sure our government works for us.
For those of you looking for spots of optimism, With Honor is a group that elects veterans. And the ideology is when you're in the trenches, you don't ask whether somebody is a Republican or Democrat. There's obviously a history and a culture of working together. There are lots of little groups And if they can build force along with what you're doing, then hopefully there's some optimism around that. Let's talk about structural factors. The primaries have the effect of bringing out the most partisan voters, a relatively small proportion of the electorate, compounded by districts that aren't very competitive, so your only chance is losing in the primaries, so you tack hard, hard right, hard left. Is there anything we can or should do about primaries to try and move the elections back towards the middle being the decisive factor, the bigger middle?
Let me say this. I had hoped, frankly, I grew up a Democrat. I voted for Jimmy Carter in 1976. Ronald Reagan and George Bush in 1980 moved me over, as many Southerners, and my whole family followed me. But I've never been one to think that either party had an exclusive on integrity or ideas. And today, I dislike both parties almost equally. I dislike both parties almost equally. The two-party system served us really well for about 100 years. It engaged me as a young person, and I'm thankful for that. The party systems can do good things. But I got to tell you, we're ground down to a halt in large part because of the parties. Now, in me, there's a libertarian streak and there's an independent streak that wished and hoped that independents might get elected at the local, state, and federal level. But reality is today in this tribal environment, it's very, very, very hard. If you don't work through the two parties, you're not going to raise the money, you're not going to be credible, you're not going to get the attention, blah, 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 blah. So with that in mind, we have to change this primary process. We have to change the party system. And there's all kind of reforms, ranked choice voting. What I love is what's happening at the state level. Follow, our sister organization, Represent Us, is leading a lot of these referenda on anti-corruption, gerrymandering, ranked choice voting. A lot of these reforms are coming from the state level. What do? We track at the federal level what is happening and try to throw gas on the fire, because this stuff needs to start at the local level, the state level. Frankly, even the Supreme Court has to be impacted by what the states are willing to do themselves, and then you lead that, and the federal government helps that and supports that. So, Charlie, we watch this with interest every cycle because the people are actually speaking through these referenda.
So Maine has passed ranked choice voting twice, actually, because the legislature, the parties that were not real keen on it, so people went back and said, you should have listened to us the first time.
Right.
I think there's a ballot referendum to do it in New York City. Massachusetts has. These things do tend to build on each other. Do you have thoughts on primaries about structural changes, Tim?
Well, Charlie, I think it comes down to getting the right candidates to run. And Democrats, and here's where Zach and I will disagree a little bit, but do it respectfully, the Democratic Party needs to do a much better job of recruiting new people, new ideas, younger people.
Amen.
To run in our party. We can't just say, well, who's going to run next year in the 3rd District of Indiana, and let's see what happens. We should be out there recruiting somebody that we know is going to have great ideas, that is going to be an attractive candidate, that can compel the interests of the blue collar and the working community. As I grew up as a Democrat, that was our message. Square deal for working people, and we have gotten away from that as a party. So we need to do a much better job. We should be a party that can openly and very, very, I think, genuinely talk about our faith if it's important to us as people. And, you know, that needs to be something that as a party we do a better job of. Secondly, I would say, and Meredith McGehee, I think, does a great job helping us on this, is in the meantime, at the federal level, after Citizens United and after the flood of money that's coming into our political system, we have what's called dark money out there. And I can run against Zach for an office, and I'll raise $1 million, and he'll raise $1 million, and our money is absolutely worthless. My message of running to represent blue-collar workers and his message of trying to do something about the deficit is completely washed out by these dark special interest groups that are funded from Miami and New York and San Francisco and Seattle and Houston. Tens of millions of dollars come in from these unaccountable secret groups, and they flood out our message. And our people don't get to tell the story. It's an outside group that tell. That we need to have transparency and disclosure. If you're going to give to a candidate, Charlie, disclose that you're giving to that candidate. Everybody should know who's giving. And so disclosure and transparency, accountability, that's what we're working with, because we know that under the current Supreme Court, Mitch McConnell in the Senate, we're not going to change that tomorrow, but we can change transparency and accountability and disclosure laws.
And enforcement. The Federal Election Commission really hasn't enforced the law in a decade. They're basically an impotent organization that's been
They don't even have
gridlocked. No, they don't even, they're not even basically chartered, and they don't enforce the law. And Porter Goss, the former CIA director, is one of our most active members, like Ambassador Sweat, of the Reformers Caucus. And he continues to say, if you have no enforcement, you have no law. And we're not enforcing campaign finance violations. You talk about dark money. The coordination between these outside groups and the actual campaign is not supposed to exist under the law, but there's almost zero enforcement. I think the very first enforcement at all was the Jeb Bush presidential campaign from 2016, but other than that, there's been no enforcement in 10 years. So these are critical issues that we're pressing for, and we now have some horsepower behind. And I do think after this next presidential election, we all need to come together around restructuring the Federal Election Commission and insisting that they're chartered, stood up, and enforce the law.
Now, I would just again say to my friend from Tennessee, let's try to come together before, not after this presidential election. For instance, here's something we all can do. You guys in New Hampshire are extraordinarily lucky. You get to help us pick the president before I get to vote in Indiana or wherever I would vote.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that people in this great state that have such power about who we all will get to pick from in the next election will show up at forums. I hear Senator Sanders is going to be on campus, Dartmouth coming up.
Weekend.
Stand up in front of Senator Sanders and say, you have been talking about changing democracy. It's a rigged, unfair system with too much money. You've been in the Senate for a long time. What have you done in a bipartisan way to actually push for reform and benefit our country? And I would say then to President Trump, when he comes here, you promised in 2016 to drain the swamp. You haven't. It's become worse. What are you going to actually do working across the aisle to drain that swamp and make more people confident in our government in Washington, D.C.? Hold both parties accountable. You have the power to do it now. Let's do that.
And Charlie, while we're on this topic, most people don't realize this, but in 2018, when Democrats won the U.S. House back, and it was a very competitive national election, Democrats received more outside dark money than Republicans. So for anybody who thinks this is a Republican problem, trust me, the Democrats that benefited from all this dark money in 2018 campaign, and they're in office today, they're not likely to help us out here. So it takes reformers, not just one party or the other. If you think that, oh, sweep all the Democrats in, this is going to change, we've seen this movie before. You know, Speaker Pelosi, President Obama had a lock-solid, all three branches, the whole 9 yards, for 2 years. This didn't happen back then, even though it was supposed to happen. So it's not as much which party governs, it's that we get new, committed people to reform that will do this no matter what. And we're seeing them emerge from both parties. We just need a majority.
And I got to say, Charlie, I agree. And we at Issue 1, I think this was even before you joined Issue 1, we were critical of President Obama for not taking some executive action to do more about money in politics.
So we have some time for questions. There's a hard stop at 5. Is there a microphone, or I can just repeat the questions? So I will turn it over to you.
While they're getting those microphones, I want to thank every one of you for being here. I'm encouraged by the diversity that's in the audience of every age group, et cetera. And so whatever prompted you to come out today, I want to personally thank you for doing that. It encourages us that people care still.
I would join in on that and say we were just walking around, the sunshine was out, and I didn't think anybody'd come inside with that sunshine.
It's kind of nice here in New Hampshire, y'all.
Yeah, beautiful.
I know the snow's coming, but
Come back
it's
for
really
the primary.
nice.
It's a little cooler. The microphones are ready. Questions? There's one right down here. Well, actually, that's closer right there.
I'm not a student, but I'll start it off. Thank you. But speaking
Sir, your
for-
name? Can you give us your name?
Sure, my name is Stuart Johnson.
Stuart.
And, hi Charlie.
Hello.
I think, I'm not sure I reflect the thinking of everybody in this room, but we can't help but be pretty discouraged even after having heard you speak.
Sure. Sure.
I don't think anybody here can pretend that something's going to change. And that's pretty discouraging. Now, having said that, for example, I think you mentioned a congresswoman from Virginia. And I forget her name, but she was very good last night.
Spanberger from Virginia.
Very good, very articulate. And I was on the edge of being sure she would say, we can't start impeachment proceedings until we've read the issues that were going to be presented today and had testimony from the National Security Director. But she didn't. She did the party line. And I said, what the heck is she doing that for? She's a smart person. Okay? But what has happened is that there is this herd mentality.
Yep.
Everybody's got to get on board. And until you can break that and get people to actually think for themselves and think differently, you're not going to get anywhere down there. It's herd against herd, and it's breaking the country. The second thing I want to say is this. I hear what you said on independents and their potential for having any success. I'm not going to buy that quite yet, okay? Of course, I love Howard Schultz. I think he's the only human being that I've seen so far that makes sense if he runs, and I think maybe he's not going to run.
He's out.
He's out.
He's
Yeah,
out.
he's not running.
Already
And
quit.
that's very sad. Maybe, Charlie, in your initiatives, you can take some advantage of what I think is it's only my opinion, a bright man.
Sure.
But if you think about a head-to-head between either, let's say Joe Biden, okay, and Donald Trump, put yourself in the position of the electorate, and I'm only one member, who are fed up, really fed up. Think of the position that an independent that has some credulity, if that's the right word,
It's a good word.
such as a Howard Schultz. Just think about it. And don't give up on independence. Don't give up, okay, on individuals that might not be a Democrat and might not be a Republican.
Sure.
I hear you. I know the current thinking. It's right down the middle. But I think you can argue both sides as to who an independent would benefit. I think that gets to be very murky. So if ever there was a chance, and if I had any hope for the future of this country, that would be it. Getting an
So-
independent to have success. Pretty long shot. Anyway, that's all I
Stuart,
have.
let me try and be brief. So Zach, I know Zach is jumping out of his seat to answer your good question too. First of all, let me just say on the independents, we need good people to run. Democratic, Republican, Independent. I have 4 kids, I think I mentioned that earlier, and on abortion, on gay marriage, on deficit reduction, on the environment, on education, they're not traditionally in the Democratic or the Republican Party. And when I spend time on campus at my kids' schools and go to visit them and have a beer with them, and we talk politics all the time, late into the night, they're not happy about any choices. And so this movement is coming. And
Yeah.
we older people may, try to funnel it into certain, things we understand. But I think there is a major effort going to be taking place to redefine some of these issues that will redefine the party system or create a third party at some point. And you could look at the abortion issue just by itself or the deficit issue just by itself on that. And then the second part of your question was?
Well, basically, it stems from the herd mentality.
So I want to address Spanberger and what you said about Spanberger.
The need for a voice that's either not
So
here
that's what
or-
I was kind of talking about with my answer. I want to talk about Spanberger because I think you misinterpreted something that she said that was key, and you come back at me if you disagree. I lived through the Clinton impeachment proceedings and know how divisive this can be for the country. And my advice to Speaker Pelosi was go very slow on this. Make sure you bring the American people along and don't go for a proceeding until facts are in. You said that Spanberger was for an impeachment proceeding. That's not what she's for. She's for an impeachment inquiry. That is exactly, the articles of impeachment then will be voted on by the House after the inquiry, and then they will decide as the full House whether or not to go forward if they have the facts. They may well determine that there is no proof here, and so there's not a level of treason, high crimes, or misdemeanor to remove him from office and therefore to recommend from the Senate. I voted as a Democrat for the inquiry on Bill Clinton. He was not happy with me to even look at the facts. But my constituents wanted to get to the bottom of it. They wanted to see the facts. I think they deserved them. But then I voted against the articles as they were proposed to the House because I didn't think they reached high crimes and misdemeanors. Morally, they were deeply offensive what he did, but not to the Founding Fathers' threshold of impeachment, and therefore I voted no for it to go to the Senate.
You're absolutely right on a clarification that you made with respect to Congresswoman, forget her name.
Spanberger.
Her position, she was in line with Nancy Pelosi's step yesterday. It was not the full step, and I do recognize the distinction, but you're absolutely correct in making that clarification. Still, she went further than I expected her to go.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and all I want to add, in Tennessee, you're disgust with where we are with the major party nominees, maybe in 16 and 20. In Tennessee, we don't call that the lesser of two evils, we call it the evil of two lessers. Where 340 million people, and these are the only choices that we get? Seriously? Seriously? 2 cycles in a row. All due respect to all the candidates, all due respect, all due respect, all due respect. This is not good. And we can do a lot better. And the next generation needs to be encouraged to step up without fear of how much experience you have. But we need patriots from the younger generation to step up. We don't have good choices in leadership in this country. And that's not our tradition. We've had good choices. We're finding that on both sides, that these military and intelligence experts from both sides make really good representatives, and they might have a little more courage than the other person that is a party wonk and somebody that drinks a Kool-Aid and hides in the bosom of their party and has no courage. And frankly, the military is one of the institutions that still has the confidence of the American people. So those veterans from both sides, from the next generation, may be that field. Now, I would just say, I get your cynicism. My wife has the same cynicism. She says, Zach, why do you spend so much time with issue 1? This is not going to change. And I say, Kim, if it doesn't, we're toast, girl. We can't give up. So don't check out, and we'll keep an open mind about whether independents can go.
Stay engaged, Stuart.
But an independent, listen, if Michael Bloomberg 2 years ago would have said, I'm running as an independent, with his resources, he would still be in this thing, man. If the founder of Starbucks is stepping out and he's a smart guy, it's hard for an independent unless they're super, super wealthy. How do you compete with the two parties? You know, you either have to have the fame of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson or Oprah. Oprah would make a good candidate, you know. But otherwise, how do you break this thing? You know, and at the congressional level, run as an independent with these gerrymandered districts and the parties, they protect their weak. I mean, these parties protect their weakest members. Now, that doesn't work in anything else unless you're the Cleveland Browns. They seem to protect their weakest people, but everybody else continues to lose. Yes, sir.
And while the mic comes down, I just want to add, as somebody who worked really hard to elect independents in 2018, I still believe that having people who don't drink either Kool-Aid is a step forward.
It's
and I
good.
wake up every
It's
morning
good.
hoping I'm going to turn on the radio.
It's good.
And Lisa Murkowski and Joe Manchin and Michael Bennett have said, you know what, we're not leaving the Senate, but we've left our
We'll leave the
parties.
party.
And
Angus
we're now in
King.
charge. Angus King,
Angus
he's already
King.
there.
Yeah.
Right? And the 5 of us will
Right.
deny either party
Boy,
majority.
that'd
You know
be-
what? We're now in charge.
That'd be a force.
Right, that is my dream. But in the meantime, you were there in Nashville when Howard Schultz spoke to the group that
Right.
leaned left.
Right.
And the reaction was more hostile, I would say, than if Trump had been there,
I know.
because the view, the irony, the partisanship is people don't like their choices, but they hate one more than the other.
Yeah.
And they are desperately afraid that the one that they hate most is going to get elected.
That's right.
And independents, because of the structure, mess with that. Jim, sorry.
It's interesting, I'm presently teaching a course exactly on this topic.
So your name is Jim?
Jim
Jim.
Wilson, yes. And I appreciate your platitudes and your hopes, and I share them. But I'd like to hear you speak about some specific reforms that could take place to bring about what I think is the real need, is some real genuine competition between the parties, where each party is held accountable. And a lot of talk has been talking about ranked choice, about some sort of bipartisan top 3 or 4 in primaries, rather than having separate, different independent party primaries, but having bipartisan primaries. You mentioned gerrymandering. Are there reforms that can be made in those areas that can really have a difference?
Jim, I think there are all kinds of things going on at the state level that are accomplishing these. 28 states out of our 50 have already passed significant reforms on ethics, on disclosure, on lobbying, on many of them, as Charlie just cited, with Maine, on ranked voter preferences. So that is happening despite what the federal government is not doing and not taking action on. So there are all kinds of specifics out there that are taking place. I come back to what I mentioned before is, we got to step up and have new people run and infuse the system with the new ideas and help define either the parties differently or create a new party that can be viable. Charlie's talked about how many hurdles there are to an independent getting on the ticket. When I first ran, Ross Perot was running for president. And nobody gave him any kind of chance to win votes. He got, in my state, between 19 and 28% of the vote, independents. He was a force on talking about blue-collar workers, about the challenges of globalization.
But candidates like that are just spoilers.
No, I don't think he was, Jim. I think he brought...
I think we need a system.
When Clinton finally won that presidency, the 2 issues that Ross Perot was most concerned about, trade and fair trade, and deficits, although they're still bad today under Trump.
That was the high point.
Those were the issues that Clinton talked a lot about. Now, he didn't address them, formally.
So Jim, though, I want to say this, and you're an educator, so I definitely don't want to act like I know half as much about it as you do. But I do think this, and this is an instinctive feel, having grown up a Democrat from the South and been a Republican and an office holder on the Republican side, and knowing what's happening in the Republican Party today, because this is not the Republican Party that I signed up for. This is the Trump Party, and it's a very, very different moment. But it's going to come to an end. And I think there's going to be a complete realignment. There are factions in both parties right now that may find their own way. This may be the end of the two-party system as we know it. I don't know. I can't predict the future. But I can tell you that it could very well happen as a result of this period of disruption. And again, the disruption was coming even if Trump not won, because you could feel it on both sides. Again, what was Sanders, a socialist, coming on and almost beating Hillary Clinton and still being out there? The progressive movement was born because of the Sanders campaign, frankly. And you see Ron Paul and Sanders, we serve with these people. They're not great candidates, but they had a message that resonated with a lot of people on both sides that got people activated. There is a realignment underway of these traditional parties right now. What's the Republican Party going to be like after Trump? It's wide open. You know, the last time I was in this state, I was campaigning for Marco Rubio in January of 2016 for president. What a different moment it would be had he succeeded. He was here campaigning for Barack Obama in 2006. In 2008, in this state, excuse me. And so
I wasn't that early.
I just think for you, the professor, talking about the future of the parties, we don't support, at this time, issue 1 doesn't have anything on our agenda trying to change the two-party system. That's a big, bold task, but I think it's happening. I don't know where it's going, but I think there's a complete realignment. There's such groups in the party. You know, you think about the Tea Party coming on. I mean, the Tea Party looks like a nothing burger compared to this Trump thing, you know, in my party. So there's a massive disruption going on. What's going to happen after it? Somebody's going to fill this void because there's going to be a big void. And what are we all about?
And I want to talk
I
about.
would say one thing, though, that I applaud what you were doing. But, and I think you're probably right, the parties are going to redefine.
They're going to do it, yeah.
Whether it's a new party or not,
Right.
none of us are smart enough to.
Depends on what the parties do, Jim.
Right.
But even if they redefine themselves, that doesn't do any good if they're not working together.
Yeah, amen.
Let me
I
talk
agree
about
with
the
you.
They could be
specifics
going
of.
this way, and
Right.
I don't like the
No.
way the parties.
We end
go
up
right
Italy.
now.
We look like Italy.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about the specifics of ranked choice voting, though, because I think that you got to get at the institutions to change the incentives. Ranked choice voting is where, in its purest form, there's an open primary, which immediately changes the incentives. So no longer do you have small groups on either side picking very rarefied candidates. The top 4 in one form advance to the second round. Among all voters, it's a variation on California's top 2. And then you rank.
California's done it, right?
Just with 2, though.
Right.
But it's still an open primary.
It's
So you have
open
2 Democrats
primary,
running. It certainly creates an incentive to appeal to a broader swath of voters in that first round. You then rank your choices, 1, 2, 3, 4. If nobody gets a majority, the lowest person is knocked
Drops
off the
off.
ballot
Go
and
again.
eventually keeps going until someone wins a majority. But the important thing is it creates incentive for all candidates to be more civil, because being someone's second choice vote is very important. You can't just light up the other candidates. It provides an opening for independents, for a Green Party, who then are no longer spoilers, because if they get eliminated, if you think about Florida in 2000, Nader still runs, gets eliminated, presumably those votes go to Gore, and he's not a spoiler. So that alone, and when you explain it to people, it's quite popular,
Right.
and Zach was there, he introduced her. The most popular proponent of ranked choice voting right now is Jennifer Lawrence.
Yeah, y'all know her.
I'd
Yeah.
vote for anything Jennifer Lawrence is for.
Zach's going to bring her back later this term,
I'd,
right,
I'd be
Zach?
on her side.
Other question?
Next question?
You got 2 microphones at the same time.
You talked about how the media exacerbates our bipartisan dysfunctional government situation by obviously often focusing on the food fight and things that have gone wrong without much attention to things that have gone well. So what would you do to reduce that influence of the media or change it? Would you do anything to improve the situation?
Well, this is not an issue 1 thing, but some of the other like parliamentary systems around the world could be modeled. We don't have to have a consecutive 2-year political cycle in this country. One of the things that perpetuates it is the media and advertising and focus and attention. But wouldn't it be nice if we actually couldn't campaign for 1 year and then you could campaign for 1 year? That you actually call an election season where you can campaign, you can't raise money. Guess what? 10 states have done this, including my home state of Tennessee. You cannot raise money while the legislature is in session in the state of Tennessee. From January to May, you can't raise money. Guess what they do? They legislate. Guess what they do? They work together. They don't have fundraisers the night before they cast votes. They have a season that is off limits. In our 2-year election cycles, we could have a season that is off limits. What happens to the nightly 24/7 talk stations? They can go talk about something else. Maybe they'll actually cover the news instead of the food fight. because the food fight is perpetuated with the ability to have all politics all the time. The American people are checking out. They're sick and tired of it. They're on politics overload. Let's go back to the old way where there's a campaign season and the rest of the time we're Americans working together to solve problems.
What's your first name? Sir? Bill. So Bill, I don't know if you ever saw this episode on CNN Crossfire, where they used to have this show where the two women or two guys would get on and they just yell at each other. It was, blood pressure rose across the country, and you never really learned much from the show. So Jon Stewart gets on, and as a comedian, they think this is going to, really inflate their ratings to have this popular comedian on the show. And he looks at the two hosts, I think it's Tucker Carlson and Paul Bogalia, and he says, "You should be ashamed of yourselves. You guys have this great platform to educate, to motivate, to tell positive story, and all you do is yell and scream at each other." And they think he's kidding. They think he's doing a comedy routine. And they go, "Oh, that's funny, John, what?" And he goes, No, I'm serious. And then he gets a couple words that are bleeped out. You got to look at this on YouTube. And they cut to a commercial because CNN doesn't want to be held accountable for, Jon Stewart saying, "You're not being responsible here." I think these news networks are only going to be responsive, and I say this in kind of a crude way. Advertising dollar and eyeballs on.
Yeah, turn it off.
Turn it off.
Yeah.
And I said to my wife 6 months ago, I said, you know what? I'm not starting my day with TV. Gets me too irritated. I don't learn any of the good news going on anymore in the world. They don't give me objective information. I'm going to go and get my sources online where I can, and I want to learn what I want to learn. I was talking to some Dartmouth students today at lunch, and I said, "Where do you get your news?" And I said, "Not TV. We never watch it. We just go to A, B, and C sources online and for objective stuff." If we start doing that as a people, they're going to be responsive to us. But again, it takes, just like this effort to get our government back, it takes all of us making it a priority. And that takes energy.
Joanne's going to shut us off.
Well, we're told, I guess, have to leave in a minute, but we have one last question.
One last question, then a hard stop.
Yes, sir.
Hopefully this is quick. I've heard you say a couple times after Trump, but he was elected, and the electorate who elected him will still be there. And approximately, from what I hear, 80% of them still support him. How are we going to get an educated, sophisticated electorate?
So in the state of Tennessee, our new governor, Bill Lee, just made a huge commitment to civics again. We have an entire generation that doesn't know the difference between the United States Congress, the state legislature, the three branches of the federal government. They can't tell you the name of the Vice President of the United States or the Speaker of the House. We absolutely have lost our focus on what's necessary to restore the founder's promise of civil government. And so you're exactly right. I always tell people, yes, it's half the elected's responsibility and it's half the people's responsibility. It goes both ways. We've got to bring the next year, we got a whole generation now, we got to remediate, catch up people on what does civil government mean, and you're right. We have an electorate though that was so restless they were willing to grab whatever choice other than the establishment they could. And it's happened. Now the question is, what are we going to do afterwards? I do believe there's still, maybe not a majority, but a lot of Americans that are willing to step in and help us bring civil government back to action. And I have great hope with this next generation. I've got a 32-year-old and 30-year-old adult children that are real active and really engaged, and they are very pragmatic. And so I have great hope for this next generation, but we have to bring civics back at the heart of education. I think we've lost that.
I would just add to that too. I agree with Zach. Civic education is a critical component of this. I also think it comes back to values and treasuring our experiment that our revolution put us in charge. I mean, Abigail Adams, Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, they didn't say, that kings and queens or monarchs or rich people would be running our government. They said we would be. And Madison talked about enlightened education is essential in a democracy. We have to be educated people to know enough about who we're going to pick for office. That is critical. And my family, my mom and dad said to me growing up, you're going to go to church and you're going to vote. Voting is a responsibility. It is a commitment to our form of government. And when we have 10% of people vote in state elections and 15% turn out for some congressional primaries, we're not doing our jobs. And so part of that is civic education. Part of that is us inculcating in our kids and in Americans that we need to not only vote, we need to show up and hold candidates like Sanders and Trump and others accountable for what they're doing and not doing.
Good. I want to thank both of you. Thank Congressman Sweat. Thanks all of you for engaging and
Special
continue
thanks
to
to Dick
engage.
Sweat.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dick.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Great.